Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sin Mancuso, and this is Notes on the News. I'm Peter Mancuso, and this is the show where I break down the biggest stories in film, media, entertainment. And give you my thoughts. If you're joining us live, leave it. If you have any questions or comments during any of the topics I'm covering, feel free to drop it in the live chat. I'll do my best to keep an eye on it. See if we can kind of get a conversation started. Don't be shy. Don't be afraid. It's the internet. No one knows who you are. So leave a comment, leave something in the live chat so we can get a conversation started. If you haven't already, please like this video, like this live stream. It really, really helps with people finding the channel and, growing this with engagement, the algorithm. So if you have stumbled upon this, why not subscribe, right? It's, we're trying to grow this community the best I can. And again, it would really mean a lot to me. If you're watching this after the fact, still super happy to have you. If you want to jump around, by the time you're watching this, you should be able to find time codes in the description so you can kind of jump around the video at your leisure. We stream this show every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Tonight's a little just different. I had a work meeting until 6-ish, so I just got home like 10 minutes ago. But usually it's Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern time. And again, like I said before, please like this, and if you haven't already, subscribe. All right, let's take a look at the box office from this past week. Total domestic box office, $113 million, which was about a 52% drop from the previous week. So, it's pretty good, right? Again, you don't like to see a huge drop, and as you can see here, everything that made it into the top 10 also dropped, right? Which makes sense. Everything's usually always dropping. But these aren't just little drops. These are, most of these are 50 plus, and a good majority of them are 60 plus. So let's just look at some of the newer stuff here. Den of Thieves 2, opening at third place in its first week, bringing just a little over 15 million, which puts it just above my projected target opening. Again, the full projections were around 12 to 19, so this kind of fell exactly, where it was, I expected it to fall. This might be one of the closest predictions I've ever made on this show. Den of Thieves 2, this is like a heist movie. I have a good friend, I don't know if Jacob you're watching, I have a good friend Jacob who watches, and apparently he really likes the first one. He kind of calls it like a secret art house film, at least like the first one. It's kind of like a really sleazy version of Heat, like the Michael Mann 90s crime movie. I really knew nothing about this, but it's, the biggest new movie of the week, which, again, like I've been talking about this channel week after week, that January is one of the graveyard time periods for the American box office. So, it makes sense that this is the biggest new movie, and it's only at number 3, right? And notably, though, it was made for $40 million, so it is still very much in the red, as you can see. We still have a long way to go, to make this a profitable venture for the studios. Also opening, at least in America, or at least North America, Game Changer. So this opened at 10, so barely squeaked into the top 10. This is a Bollywood film, though I feel kind of ignorant calling it that because I don't know if it's just like any movie made in India is a Bollywood film. The same way, just because something's made in America, it's not wrong, but it kind of feels wrong to just call any movie made in the United States a Hollywood movie, right? But in any case, so this has already been playing worldwide. So this is just a small part of like a 14. Once you convert from rupees to American dollars, it's made about 14.5 million worldwide. But again, similarly here, off of like a $40+ million budget. Again, this is all being converted. So it's still a huge loss, and usually these movies that we get from India end up actually having pretty good ROI. So this is a little surprising, but it is still new. I wonder. I don't know when it opened in India. So I don't know if this is like maybe it just opened the same weekend, so it still has plenty of time to kind of make back that money. But I don't get paid enough to know that information. So looking still, a lot of these placements here for this overall top 10 are almost identical to what we had the week before. Mufasa the Lion King holding on to its first place spot now in its fourth frame, bringing in a little bit 21 and a half-ish million. Still a big drop though, right? Like 61%. That's not great. But perhaps it makes sense because it had a big bump because of the holidays, so it's kind of finding its way down to a more sustainable amount. Notably though, so domestically it's made almost $190 million. For eagle-eyed viewers who follow the show, I used to have the column domestic multiple. I've changed it to legs, right? So let's just stop calling it. Let's just call it what it is. What kind of legs does this movie have? And this formula is pretty similar, but the difference is, and this formula is coming directly from thenumbers.com, so the-numbers.com. And what I was doing was dividing the total domestic, dividing it by the opening. But I always found that problematic because what if you open smaller and then go wider? But it's not like it's going from limited to wide. Like it starts wide, but it's like maybe 1,000 theaters, and then it opens up to 2 or 3. What the formula on thenumbers.com does is that it's, instead of being the total divided by the opening, it's the total divided by whatever the biggest weekend was, which is much more, I think, effective and revelatory about the performance. So Mufasa's had very good legs, right? It's this figure here is over 5, which is really, really good, which means that, only maybe 20-ish% of its gross came from that biggest weekend. So it's been doing surprisingly well. And worldwide it's made about 542, which is still a far cry from the billion that the original Lion King 2019 live action movie made. But considering it was made for $200 million, this is still a profitable movie. And again, like I've said before, I think it helps the Lin-Manuel Miranda of it all. People making fun of it, rightfully so, because it's kind of dumb. Making fun of the song, the brother song. I won't imitate it anymore. I've done it many times on the channel. But it gets people talking, right? Like I don't think I've heard a single song, even in meme format, from Moana 2, right? The cultural impact of Moana 2, which dropped from 3rd to 5th place now in its 7th week, which is really impressive. It's still here in its 7th frame. But it's had like zero cultural impact. Not to say that Mufasa will have very long-lasting cultural impact, but at least it's in the conversation. I feel like Moana 2 never was in the conversation. Also, holding its place from last week, we have Sonic the Hedgehog 3, holding its 2nd place spot, opened the same day as Mufasa, so it's also in its 4th frame, bringing in, a little over 17 million. Again, another like 60, almost 70, like 66% drop. It's made more domestically than Mufasa, around 205 million, but it's made less worldwide. And I've talked about this before. I think that has to do with, even despite the fact that Sonic is itself a Japanese property, Mufasa, I feel like, plays better in international markets because it's less about, the story is very straightforward and archetypal. And the visual effects are something to marvel at, whereas Sonic 3, at least in terms of the writing, very much feels like a Western film. But again, the name of the game is Rate of Return, right? So this is made less worldwide, but it also cost way less to make. So this actually has a better percent return than Mufasa, around 215%. Also holding a spot here, Nosferatu in its 4th, holding 4th place in its 3rd week now, bringing in $12.5-ish million. This has been a surprisingly successful financially. It's made, its percent return here is similar to that of Mufasa. And this is good to see for Robert Eggers because he's, and these aren't Bongo's numbers here, but, I remember a couple years ago, The Northman, which I thought was really great, did not do very well critically and did not do well commercially. And it was some concern over, is he going to still have a career? Is he going to really be able to make, is this kind of like the peak? Is he not really going to be able to make bigger projects anymore? But Nosferatu, I guess, is just hitting different. It's really been embraced by the cinephile community. I have tickets to go see it on Thursday, but I've just been really bad about going to see these movies. I've just been so busy. So I feel like I've had Nosferatu on the books like 3 different times, and I've had to cancel every time. So, you know, it is in the profitable zone, which is, you know, which again is good to hear, or good to see rather, right? And again, it's something that's going to hold. It looks like it's holding and continue. It's going to continue holding week after week, right? Which, you know, Moana 2 kind of is, or if you look at those legs, it has good legs. But it did, like I said, it did drop from 3rd to 5th place. It has been in the top 10 for, you know, almost 2 months now, which is impressive. Made a little under 10 million for the week. Worldwide, it's so close to $1 billion. It literally only needs $10 million more dollars to get there. And looking at last week's numbers, it was at 960, and now it's at 990. So I'm gonna predict it will cross $1 billion. It will cross the $1 billion threshold. If not this next week, then certainly the week after. Unless it keeps having huge precipitous drops. But again, you know, it made 30 million worldwide over this 1 week. So, you know, even if it drops half, that's still 15%, 15 million, and it'll cross that threshold. And it's been very profitable, right? Again, Disney, this is the year of Disney learning the wrong lessons. And the lesson is cut the original crap, just stick to, just play the hits, right? Off of a $150 million budget, this thing has a almost 600% return. So I'm sure the board of directors of Disney are very, very happy. Looking here, a couple other items. Wicked is also still in the top 10, dropping from 5th to 7th place, but this is its 8th frame. This has been very, very successful. Bringing around $8.5 million for the week. Look at the legs though. So this has made, $460 million domestically, almost $700 million worldwide off of just a roughly the same amount that Moana 2 was made for. So for a nearly 3-hour musical, this is incredible. And it's an incredible film, and it's deserving of this success. And it's interesting because Wicked and Moana 2 kind of keep ping-ponging around each other. You know, if we kind of look at each week, because they basically opened right around the same time. Because Wicked opened the Friday before Thanksgiving, and the Moana 2 opened the day before Thanksgiving. So they've basically been in theaters for almost the same amount of time. And they keep kind of flipping and flopping, above and below one another. So it'll be interesting to see which one finally taps out and leaves the top 10. Also opening around the same time was Gladiator 2, which is also still here, dropping from 8th to 9th place. Not doing nearly as well, right? Only bringing a little over 2 million this week. And again, the ROI is still not, again, you want to double the budget, right? Because the budget does not account for marketing and advertising costs. And that's the kind of tragedy is the wrong word, but that's kind of the interesting thing about the box office is that, you can make $1 billion, but if it costs X amount, how much are you getting out of every dollar you put in? So, this was just so expensive. This is one of the more expensive movies of the year. It looks like. I don't have those figures exactly, but at least just looking at the top 10, 250 million, is way above most of these movies here. So, very interesting top 10 here. Again, it's kind of just business as usual. And I don't see us really having anything that's going to shake this up all that much for a couple of weeks. But it doesn't mean we don't have any new movies. So, looking ahead to this upcoming weekend, we have Wolfman, a reboot, remake, reimagining of the classic Universal monster movie, The Wolfman. This is projected to make around 14 to 25 million. I'm going to put a target around 20. So again, we're talking about the biggest movies of the weekend, are max 25. Like, again, it's just reflective. It reflects the period of the year that we're in. And then we also have One of Them Days. This is I guess, kind of buddy comedy with Keke Palmer and SZA. of all people. I don't know if she's been in a lot of stuff. I don't think so. This is also going to open fairly small. Only projected to make around 6 to 10 million. I'm going to put a target around 7. You know, I like both of these people. I mean, I like SZA's music. I don't know how good or funny she might be in something. So I'm hopeful for this. Hopefully this is good, because I think this is seems like a fun premise and just a fun pairing of two actors. All right, before moving on, just want to give a quick plug. I have another YouTube channel called Peter Squared, where I cover topics related to, you know, film, media, and entertainment in a more structured video essay format. The video I have up right now is called A Closer Look at Frozen, where, you guessed it, I take a closer look at the Disney film Frozen, taking a look at what went right, what went wrong, and everything in between, using these, you know, this old and young version of myself, these cartoon versions. So it's a lot of fun. It would really mean a lot to me if you go check that out. You can find that video in the description down below. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. Let's talk about story number 1. So Venu Sports, all you Venu Sports fans who bought all your merch and were so excited, I don't know if they even made merch, but if you were excited for this, I regret to inform you it has been officially canceled by Disney and Warner Brothers and Fox, who were the joint kind of participants of this enterprise. A joint statement put out by the three companies says, quote, "After careful consideration, we have collectively agreed to discontinue the Venu Sports joint venture and not launch the streaming service. In an ever-changing marketplace, we determined that it was best to meet the evolving demands of sports fans by focusing on existing products and distribution channels. We are proud of the work that has been done on Venu to date and grateful to the Venu staff, whom we will support through this transition period," end quote. I don't really know if it's a transition period, because you're not transitioning to anything. You were gonna be made, this was gonna exist, and now it's not gonna exist. So basically, everyone's out of a job, presumably. And DirecTV, who was one of the main opponents to this streaming service being launched, said, quote, "DirecTV remains a leader in sports, and we look forward to working with our programming partners, including Disney, Fox, and Warner Brothers Discovery, to compete on a level playing field to deliver sports fans more choice, control, and value, all in one experience," end quote. So, you know, if you stumbled upon this video, this obituary, essentially, and you're like, I don't even know what this is about, so kind of take a step back. So about a year ago, this may have even been like right before I started this channel, but it was like the early days back when I started this in February of 2024. Venu Sports, this was going to be a sports-focused streaming service. Originally announced, it didn't have a name. It was later announced, it was revealed, right? They made a logo. It had a logo, it had a CEO, it was a whole thing. It was going to be a sports-focused streaming service as part of this joint partnership, like I said, between Disney and Warner Brothers and Fox, and their respective sports offerings. So this would include, but was certainly not limited to, things like ABC Sports, Fox Sports, TNT Sports, and ESPN, right? And it would have been priced at around $42.99 a month. So the idea was that it was cheaper than cable or something like YouTube TV, where you pay maybe $80 a month. Like YouTube TV, I think is like $80-something a month. You get all the channels, but if you just want it for sports, then this might be a more cost-effective option, right? You're not getting as much, and so you might argue you're actually getting less for your money because, you know, YouTube TV is double the amount, but you're getting way more than double the content. But if you don't want that content, then you would rather just pay this what they call a skinny bundle, right? And like I said, it was not just like an idea thrown around. This was something officially announced, had a logo, it had a CEO, it had a price point. That was a big announcement. Like, it was a full-fledged developing product. But it started to face some hurdles very, very quickly. So primarily it faced lawsuits from smaller streaming services, particularly companies like Fubo, right? Fubo argued that Venu Sports would, quote, "substantially lessen competition and restrain trade," end quote. Because their argument is, you know, we have to pay all these licensing fees to get the sports content.
whereas you guys are going to pool all of the content together, and you're not going to have to pay the licensing fee because it's just yours. You don't have to. So we're going to, because we have to pay the licensing fees, we're going to have to offer a more expensive product, and people are going to be driven to yours, and it's just going to, the competition's going to be very non-existent. And Fubo wasn't the only one. Like I said, DirecTV, EchoStar, which owns Dish, they also raised these concerns. And it just kind of kept getting more and more complicated. So, like, for example, the big thing that Warner Brothers was providing was the NBA rights that TNT had. Well, those NBA rights, I believe, have now gone to Amazon. Right? So that was a huge piece of what Warner Brothers was bringing to the equation. And a lot of people wondered, because it was already going to be limited. It wasn't your one-stop shop for sports because it wouldn't have anything on from CBS. It wouldn't have anything from NBC. So on top of that now, even the initial proposition is being neutered, right? And this is one of those examples of a story that was another story earlier in the week. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting story. I'm going to talk about that. And then it became this whole other thing. Because earlier last week, it was announced that Disney had struck a deal with Fubo to merge Fubo with Hulu plus live TV, right? The live TV component of Hulu. This merged company, it would still keep the Fubo name and the Fubo management. And the idea is that the resulting Fubo, it's such a funny, it's obviously a business, but it just sounds funny for me to be saying, like, and this is really important for Fubo. But, this new Fubo would be more capable to compete with a market leader like YouTube TV, which I believe is the most successful of these non-cable television distribution, services, right? As opposed to just like a straight up cable package, just getting it digitally. YouTube TV dominates, hands down. And as part of this merger, Fubo would drop this antitrust lawsuit that was kind of tying Venu Sports up in the courts. And this seemed like this removed that was the major obstacle. So early this week I was like, oh, okay, so it seems like Venu might go through. Now, it wasn't completely solved because, the Hollywood Reporter notes that, DirecTV and EchoStar, they were not part of this deal. So they argue, they tried to make the case against lifting the court injunction, because originally Venu Sports was supposed to launch like this past fall. But basically from a court injunction, everything was put on hold. But where I guess started to unravel is, Variety notes that this merger decision to merge Fubo with Hulu plus live TV, it exposed Disney to more of the sports streaming market. And by exposed, I mean, it gave them more access to that revenue. And had put their tentacles in more avenues for sports content. Because obviously Fubo, because basically the way this works is Disney is like taking a 70% stake or something in Fubo. Well, Fubo was able to get all of the sports stuff from all the companies, including the ones that weren't part of Venu to begin with. So, I think perhaps Disney was looking at it and going, maybe Venu Sports is not as important or valuable for our business strategy as we had maybe thought a year ago. Deadline notes that they're really focusing on ESPN Plus, which is like an ESPN focused streaming service that would have still existed along with Venu Sports. It seems like they would rather at this point, at least Disney, they would rather just focus on that. So where are the three companies now, right? Like, are they hurt? Are they helped by this? Are they just exactly where they were before? I got a quote here from Robert Fishman, who's an analyst with MoffettNathanson, saying, quote, Disney is left to either double down on VMVPDs, so many acronyms. Basically, that's multi-video package distributors. Disney's left to either double down on that and stick to its recently announced Fubo deal, or to cut its losses and pay the deal's $130 million termination fee. WBD, Warner Brothers Discovery, is back in more or less the same position it likely would have been in regardless of whether Venu ever launched, and Fox could end up getting the final laugh, end quote. And I guess the reason is, Fishman says that Fox has, quote, the most to gain from the testing of the Venu thesis, that there's an appetite out there for skinnier bundles, end quote. Because Fox is a much different company than it was a decade ago, right? Once Rupert Murdoch sold 20th Century Fox and all of that to Disney, all that was left was Fox News and Fox Sports, which is really good because those are the two kinds of things that they're the only reasons why people still have cable is for news and sports. So, Fox is in a unique position where they can be a lot more targeted and strategic and be able to be a little more competitive when offering, carriage deals with different cable companies and things like that. All of this is to say that I think just channel-based television, the idea of like there's a channel that is just streaming and it's just content is just being aired regardless if anyone's watching it. That can still exist, but it needs a shakeup, right? Because the cable package, as it's been since the 80s or 90s, is undesirable. And it's always been undesirable. No one has ever said, this is like a great setup for the consumer, for myself. It's always just been a necessary evil until the advent of streaming, right? Because by definition, the cable package includes channels no one wants. That's always been the joke of like, I wish I could just choose a la carte what channels I want. And the reason why all these channels are added is so that the cable companies and the entertainment companies can make more money. Because you'll want the 5 channels you really want, so you'll be willing to pay an inflated price to pay for this package. And Deadline notes that a legal trial for Venu, had this actually gone to trial, Fubo's lawsuit, it would have put scrutiny on this practice, right? It would have maybe given the media and consumers and the legal system, it would have forced them to pay a little more attention and go, maybe this is monopolistic. Maybe forcing channels onto consumers and carriers is kind of like block booking. In the golden age of Hollywood, where studios basically turn to theaters and go, if you want Avengers Endgame, obviously it wasn't Avengers because it's like the 30s. If you want Avengers Endgame, you also have to agree to distribute or exhibit all this other schlock, right? Is the cable package that much different, right? And again, that analyst Robert Fishman from MoffettNathanson has another quote here saying, quote, with the cable network cash flows that Disney, Fox, and Warner Brothers Discovery each rely on at risk, the 3 partners decided to, at long last, cut their losses and call it quits, end quote. So I think they were at a certain point like, is this going to be worth it? Like, we might win the battle, but we might lose the war in terms of that might disrupt our cash flows. So what I think the future is more of these skinny bundles, right? More smaller focused packages. And that was the whole basis of the feud DirecTV had with Disney earlier this fall that I did a video about, where they basically were arguing we were trying to, offer consumers smaller bundles at lower prices to give them more of what they wanted. I think that is the move, and I think that's what we've learned from this process. Though that would still be just a compromise. The best would be an a la carte system where you just choose what channels you want. Now, that being said, there could be a system where you get discounts for bundling channels or choosing certain channels in bulk or certain kinds of channels together, deals. But having the option to choose, like, I literally just want these 3 channels that have nothing to do with each other, it would force entertainment companies, the people programming those channels, to produce higher quality programming that people want to include in their package, right? Because as it stands right now, because it's forced onto people, there's not as much of an incentive to improve the product. So at the end of the day, does this help or hurt these other providers? Is this, if you're not, and we're not talking about Disney or Fox, but Fubo and DirecTV and Dish, Does Venu Sports going poof, is that good or bad? Fubo definitely benefited from this whole affair because now, again, it's, by merging with Hulu, it's going to become a stronger Fubo that can better compete with like a YouTube TV. But I guess the question is, if you're DirecTV or Dish, what's more a threat to your business? Venu Sports or a supersized Fubo? I don't know. And I think that remains to be seen. But it's definitely, I thought it was really interesting. I'm not a sports person necessarily. But I thought this was an interesting new evolution. And I think that's why people got excited about it, just because it was something so different. You did see the stock prices of these companies tumble a little bit, like Disney and Fox and Warner Brothers, because there was excitement about this. Both, maybe not culture. I don't know if like my dad knew about this, who like would actually be the target audience for this. But investors were excited. And, it'll always been interesting what could have been. So, maybe it was just a big money laundering scheme. All this money spent on graphic design and business development, all of it for all of it just to essentially end up meaning nothing. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. Let's talk about story number 2. So Amazon has agreed to pay $40 million to license a documentary and a limited series about Melania Trump. This is set to be directed by Brett Ratner. If you don't know who Brett Ratner is, he was a very prominent kind of, studio director in the 90s and 2000s of things like Rush Hour and then the third X-Men movie. He was disgraced during the whole Me Too movement, accused of sexual harassment and assault. Not a very good guy, so it only makes sense that a Melania Trump documentary would be directed by Brett Ratner, of all people. This is set to debut in mid-2025, and it will offer a, quote, unprecedented behind-the-scenes look, end quote, at Melania's life. Who the fuck wants this? Like, who is asking for this? Is she interesting enough to support a project like this? She's no Michelle Obama or Jackie Kennedy. She's not particularly intriguing. And this isn't necessarily even to impugn her specifically, because I think most first, I wouldn't want to watch a documentary about Jill Biden either, right? Because she just seems, anytime I've ever seen her, she just seems like she has the personality of a wet mop, right? And this just seems like more of a vanity documentary than anything else. So you might be asking, well, Peter, why are you even talking about this then? Well, there's 2 reasons. One, it was a slow news week. But number 2, most importantly, is this is just representative of something I've talked about a lot on this channel, and I'm not the only one to talk about this. This is just another move by Jeff Bezos. Whether, even though he's not technically the head of Amazon anymore, this just reflects a further attempt to curry favor with Trump now that he's won, right? Because notably, if you look at the facts over the past couple months, because Bezos now owns Washington Post, the editorial board was gonna do an endorsement of Kamala, and he axed it. He has donated $1 million to Trump's inauguration fund. And most recently, I think it was last week, I did a story about this. The Washington Post blocked a political cartoon satirizing, Jeff Bezos brown-nosing Trump, along with other tech moguls, right? So the reason why I'm talking about this is that this is just another example of these wealthy individuals doing whatever they can to like I said, to curry favor. And not only curry favor, but again, benefit the Trump and the Trump family, right? So Rolling Stone notes, it's unclear how much of that $40 million is going directly to Melania. I'm sure that money goes into the production part. But again, it just reinforces this idea that people have, I'm not the first person to say this, that Trump, being president is a money-making enterprise for the Trumps. They don't have any true political or ideological ambitions other than their own power and influence and money, right? And not to say they're unique in that, but like in a very distinct, discrete way. That Trump uses the office of the presidency to benefit himself in ways that past presidents have not done. Not to say that other presidents haven't capitalized on it after leaving office, right? But Trump is so brazen and naked about it. And again, you see these wealthy individuals kind of kowtowing to Trump and trying to make him happy. And I feel like maybe this shouldn't even have been a full story, but it reflects this kind of trend. I feel like this is like the third story I've done talking about this now. I feel like you could put all the pieces together, and I think my main takeaway from all of this, and maybe this will be the last time I talk about this for a while, but what all of this has revealed, along with the recent announcement by Mark Zuckerberg of like removing fact checkers from Facebook because it's making it too politically biased, which sidebar, if your fact checking leads to a left-leaning bias, maybe you don't like maybe the other side is just like if facts favor a certain political argument, then like maybe you have a problem if you're on the other end of that argument. So my point with all this is that this moment just feels different than 2016. In 2016, when Trump's elected, it felt like there was this fiery resistance pushing against him. Now, 8 years later, it just feels like there's this like resigned acceptance, or in some of these cases, even embrace of Trump, right? I think people just don't have the stomach for another 4 years of exhausting resistance and opposition. So I think a lot of people are just going, let me just keep my head down. It'll be over in 4 years, whatever. And furthermore, some people see him as a ticket to more money and power, which historically with Trump does not work. You will always end up getting thrown under the bus for something. Like, I don't think there's really, I feel like there's very little of any people who are by his side in 2024 that were there in 2016. Like, he blows through them. And the fact that, instead of having things like universal health care and other social services and things owed to us as citizens of this country, rich people are able to, and corporations can throw around $40 million to license a nothing documentary. It's not even because I disagree with them politically. I just feel like that's just not going to be interesting. You know what I mean? Like I would watch a documentary about Maggie Thatcher. I disagree and I disagree with everything that she stood for. But that'd be an interesting documentary because she seems like an interesting character. Maybe perhaps the way Darth Vader's an interesting character. But, Melania Trump, I feel like there's just nothing there. I don't know. Maybe I'm being sexist or condescending. I don't know. A documentary about me maybe wouldn't be that interesting either, but, they're not making a $40 million documentary about me, so who's going to complain? Okay, before going on, I just want to give a quick plug to the podcast I do with my fiance Viviana called Now That's What I Call a Franchise, where we pick a film franchise and we go through every single installment, the good, the bad, and the ugly. This past season, we wrapped up talking about Star Wars, which was so much fun. We just started, we've started recording, but we haven't released them. I think it's like, not this Friday, but next Friday, we're starting our Middle Earth season. So Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, all that good stuff. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube if that's your preferred way to podcast. You can also just find us in the link down in the description below. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay, give me 1 second. I have to respond to a... I'm sorry, I'm responding to messages because people are texting me. Don't they know I'm doing a very popular web series for all two of you? Okay. Let's talk about story number 3. So Disney has ordered a TV series based on the book Holes to pilot for Disney Plus. So they're basically, if you don't know anything about TV
Typically, the first episode of a series is called a pilot. It's usually made independent of a full season. It's kind of made as like a test to see if they want to order a full season. So Disney has begun the process of doing a television series adaptation of Holes for Disney Plus. And here was the log line for the project saying, quote, "In this reimagining of the beloved 1998 book from Louis Satcher, a teenage girl, interestingly, is sent to a detention camp where the ruthless warden forces the campers to dig holes for a mysterious purpose," end quote. So this is exciting, but I'm a little trepidatious about it. So a little bit of background on Holes. Like I said, this is a 1998 novel by Louis Satcher, maybe Sakar? I never knew how to pronounce it. And here's kind of like the little breakdown on Wikipedia about the book Holes. So, quote, "The book centers on Stanley Yelnats, who is sent to Camp Green Lake, a correctional boot camp in a desert in Texas, after being falsely accused of theft. The plot explores the history of the area and how the actions of several characters in the past have affected Stanley's life in the present. These interconnecting stories touch on themes such as labor, boyhood and masculinity, friendship, meaning of names, illiteracy, elements of fairy tales, and racism," end quote. That's a lot to digest and sink your teeth into. As a kid, I remember finding it, I loved the book. And the movie, right? But the book, even going back to the 90s, the book was a big success. It was, critical and commercial success. It won the 1998 U.S. National Book Award for Young People's Literature. It won the 99 award, the Newbery Medal. That was like always like the big little symbol on a book you might see like in your school's library for children's books of a certain quality. And then, of course, it was adapted into by Disney into a film in 2003, which is perhaps, I have nostalgia glasses on, but it's like one of my favorite movies ever. Because I always loved, I mean, it's not Dostoevsky or anything, but it's I always loved how dense and intricate. It felt like a watch. Like it had all these little moving pieces that all connected with one another, and the more you knew and understood about those pieces, the more you kind of understood kind of the way the story unfolds itself, right? And it did receive a literary sequel in 2006, but it was dealing with like secondary characters. I think it focuses on Armpit, who in the movie is the one right in the middle of the picture above me, the bigger boy, right? And again, I've always loved Holes, especially now that I'm an adult, because the ideas explored are more relevant than ever, right? It was an introduction to the prison industrial complex. It was a way to introduce that concept to children, right? This idea that, punishment is not always there to serve the person being punished. Because in a perfect world, punishment is supposed to make you a better person, right? And people might go like, "Oh, well, that's very selfish." That benefits everybody. If you take a murderer and you put them through a process to make them not a murderer, that benefits everybody, right? So this book was an introduction that punishment sometimes is exploited to benefit people, right? So in the case of the book, they're, spoiler alert, they're digging holes. They're told they're digging holes as a character building exercise, but really they're looking for some treasure in the desert, right? And it's not an accident that most of the kids at Camp Green Lake are black, right? Like it also reflects the criminal justice system, that you have a innocent kid sent to Camp Green Lake. But what I also liked, it's not like it's a group of boys who are all like, I'm innocent. Like, they have all done things you shouldn't do. Like, I'm not trying to advocate like, stealing is good or whatever other crimes. I don't know they didn't really go into like what the crimes were. I think they're usually just theft. But it reflects, a restorative justice or lack of it, right? And how oftentimes we incarcerate people just because that's easier than doing the hard work of again, restorative justice. And also the fact that, because this whole idea of Stanley, his family being cursed, and that's how he ends up kind of being in the wrong place at the wrong time to kind of get, not framed, it's not intentional, but he ends up kind of taking the fall for this theft that he then gets in trouble for and has to go away.
So it speaks to the randomness of socioeconomic conditions. So I always liked how the boys at Camp Green Lake, you know, like, they're not like Stanley in that they did do what they've been accused of doing, but there is also a randomness to their socioeconomic conditions, right? That, you know, it's not that, you know, they've had a very different kind of life that has led them to this point. That was completely random and by chance, right? And a lot of really interesting stuff for a kid. And I don't think I even really picked up on a lot of this stuff. So I'm always excited to see this kind of get a resurgence, because this is a movie that my generation really likes, but I don't hear a lot of people talking about it. This is going to be interesting, though, because it's gender swapped, like, right? So, like the logline said, it's about a teenage girl. Presumably it's a camp of just girls. And I'm ambivalent one way or the other. You know, I'm always happy and excited to see more diversity and representation for marginalized groups. But at the same time, I also feel like we gender bend or race bend these iconic properties. Usually because the studios don't know what else to do with these properties, right? So they're almost like the table scraps. So I'm oftentimes against gender swapping or race swapping these kinds of things, not because I'm like, you're changing the characters. They need to be white men. That's not my problem. My problem is like can't they these groups deserve great stories of their own. They shouldn't just be getting the sloppy seconds, right? And the idea of it being just girls, it's kind of almost like a teenage Orange is the New Black, I guess. You know, again, I don't know how much of the social commentary applies here. Of course, there are, you know, millions of women incarcerated in the United States, but, you know, I don't have numbers to back me up. So please, if someone knows, I'd love to start a conversation about this in the comments. But I would imagine more men are incarcerated, right, in terms of proportion. So, you know, and notably, you know, as Ava DuVernay's documentary 13th kind of explores that, you know, slavery was abolished, but of course in the 13th Amendment or 14th, whatever it is, that, you know, slavery is abolished unless it's punishment for a crime. So that's how we as a society have kind of gone around that. So like literally the forest fires happening in, or just that it's beyond the fires now, the fires in Los Angeles, you know, not necessarily right now, but California has a history of using prison labor as firefighters. And it's like, oh, if you can make some money, you can take some time off your sentence, like that's slave labor, right? So, you know, and that's usually men. So I feel like some of the thematics might get a little muddled if it's girls, but I think, you know, perhaps they'll kind of arrive at a new thematic idea that's different, that the original could never have done because it was all boys. So, you know, I'm cautiously optimistic, but 9 times out of 10, everything that's made for Disney Plus is kind of just mid. So I'm not super excited, but I'm not like, this is a travesty. How could they have changed it from boys to girls? I really don't care. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay, let's talk about story number 4. So, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences has revealed the 323 films eligible for this upcoming Academy Awards. You know, because you have to qualify. And the voting has begun. And of those 323 films, 203, so about 2/3 of them, are eligible for Best Picture. So, the eligibility rules to be eligible for any of the categories is the film has to have had a 7-day qualifying run in either Los Angeles County, New York City, the Bay Area, Chicago, the Dallas-Fort Worth area, or Atlanta. That's why you often have indie movies that you've never heard of get nominated for Academy Awards, because what they'll do is literally have a 1-week run in one of those areas the last week of December, and it qualifies, and then once it gets nominated for something, then they do a big campaign. They do a big, they do their more wide release elsewhere in the country. So that's just for films for the Oscars in general. But then the Best Picture nominations have additional requirements. So they need to fulfill the Academy representation and inclusion standards. That was something introduced a couple of years ago to try to make the
the industry more inclusive by forcing film productions like, okay, if you want to be considered for Best Picture, you have to have like X amount of like X percent of people from one of these groups, or this, which is a whole other can of worms. But in any case, that is still one of the requirements. I think this might be the first year it's going into effect, but I could be wrong. Maybe they started it last year. I'm not quite sure. And additionally, you also need a 7-day run, not just in one of those major metro areas, but you need a 7-day run in 10 of the top 50 U.S. markets, no later than 45 days after its initial 2024 release. So it can't just be for 1 week in Chicago. You know, you need to be a little bit wider than that, you know, in order to be considered. So there are a couple front runners here for I just want to look at Best Picture. So pouring over the 200 films, you know, I would say there's 4 front runners that could win, and not just get nominated, but win. All 4 of these will be nominated for Best Picture. But the question is, you know, of these 4, which will win? I think the front runners are Anora, The Brutalist, Amelia Perez, and Wicked. The Brutalist and Amelia Perez, because those were the 2 respective drama and musical/comedy winners from the Golden Globes, and then Anora and Wicked because those seemed like the frontrunners before the Golden Globes. So those are kind of like the 4 that I'm like, I'm gonna bet any one of those 4 is gonna be the one to win. I did go through as an exercise and went through all the films that were eligible for Best Picture, and I'm gonna just give you a little, just so I can share my own little opinions here, as if I don't do that enough on the show. Here are the films that I would nominate. And notably, you know, I've not seen every important or big or good movie that came out in 2024, so there's still stuff, you know, like I said, I'm going to see Nosferatu, hopefully on Thursday, so that might, you know, it be added to this list if I were to be an actual Academy voter. But of the eligible films, here are the films that I thought were the best for 2024. Alien Romulus, Anora, The Apprentice, Challengers, Civil War, Conclave, Dune Part 2, My Old Ass, Problemista, We Live in Time, Wicked, and The Wild Robot. So I think that's like 12 or 13. So I think like the cap is there would be 10 movies. So I would have to take 3 of those out if I got to just decide the nominations. But enough about what I think. So in terms of like predictions, like I said, so I told you the 4 that I think could win Best Picture. But which 10 films are going to be the nominees? I think the definites are going to be the 4 that I said: Anora, The Brutalist, Amelia Perez, and Wicked. I also think Conclave is definitely going to get nominated for Best Picture. In terms of films I think that are likely, I think you're most likely going to see those other 5 films be Challengers, A Complete Unknown, Dune Part 2, A Real Pain, and The Substance. Especially The Substance is the surprising one that's gotten so much traction since the Golden Globes. And those are basically all the nominees for the Golden Globes, right? The other 2 nominees being Nickel Boys and September 5th. I think those could also be dark horses. Those could replace. I think if those 2 were to replace any of them, the likely candidates, it would be A Real Pain in The Substance. I think Challengers, A Complete Unknown, Dune Part 2 are not definites, but are a lot more secure. I think it probably could be anything between A Real Pain, The Substance, Nickel Boys, and September 5th that fill out those last 2 spots. We're still gonna have to wait a little bit though until we really find out, because so nominations were supposed to be announced this upcoming Friday, the 17th of January, but voting has been delayed due to the wildfires in Los Angeles, and that's really thrown a wrench into everything. So, you know, I'm not sure if they've announced a new date of like when they're going to be announcing the nominations, but you know, hopefully soon, but hopefully this, you know, ecological disaster ends and people, you know, are able to start rebuilding their lives. The Academy Awards is really at the bottom of the priorities here, but, you know, at the end of the day, it is still something interesting. So, you know, I'm hoping that things kind of start getting back on track soon. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. Let's talk about story number 5. So, Getty Images and Shutterstock are merging together in a deal valued around $3.7 billion. Billion with a B.
Getty Images CEO Craig Peters will lead the combined company. It'll still go by Getty. It'll still have the same stock, ticker symbol GETY. And it will have a reworked board of directors with board members from both companies kind of put together. And that CEO Craig Peters says the deal will bolster the company by, quote, enhancing our content offerings, expanding event coverage, and delivering new technologies to better serve our customers, end quote. So why is this happening? Again, I'm not a stock image person. I'm not, I don't pretend to be an expert in this, but this is really interesting because the stock image industry is one of the main industries, I think, that really does face an existential threat from artificial intelligence, specifically generative AI, right? Because, up until a couple years ago, if you wanted a picture of something, you need to find that picture. Most likely, because these companies were massive in the space, most likely the picture you was owned by one of these two companies, by Getty Images or Shutterstock. So if you wanted to use this picture legally, you had to pay whatever it was. Whether, I don't know if it was a one-time fee or if it was, usually I think it was just like a subscription that you would pay as like a business. But now we have, like some of you may have used, text generative AI like ChatGPT, but there's also, image generators. Now, you could just create the image that you want. If you want a picture of a frog on a log, you could type in, make a picture of a frog on a log, and then you can put, describe how you want it to look, and, it'll spit out a approximation of what you're looking for. And for most people, that's good enough, right? That's going to be a huge blow to the stock image industry. It's one of those things that you don't think about, and then you go, oh shit, yeah, if I owned that company, I'd be shitting my pants right now, right? And The Verge notes that the two companies had already dipped their toes in generative AI in this technology, right? So Getty launched their own image generator in 2023. Shutterstock partnered with OpenAI. So they were already kind of exploring, because ultimately these generative AI systems, whether it be text or image or video, need data to train on, right? So that's why with ChatGPT, it's trained on everything that's ever been published to the internet or something, right? Likewise, photo generative AI needs images to study and pull data from. So companies like Getty and Shutterstock, they have such huge libraries. That's like a gold mine for these, right? I got a quote here from TJ Leonard, who's the CEO of Storyblocks, who I guess is kind of like a smaller competitor to these two companies, saying, quote, over the last year, there's been a strong push towards ethically sourced licensed content and data to train generative models. Gone are the days when you can deploy a commercial model using scraped or publicly available data. Large brands and creative teams demand the reassurance of legal protection and that the original artists are rewarded for their contributions, end quote. So, what he's saying there, I think that's really insightful, is that, people are it's going to become much more of a problem. Because essentially, the big argument against something like ChatGPT is that, it's basically scraping all of this written material, and none of the people who wrote that material are getting compensated. Same thing with like photos or videos. So it's going to become more and more necessary to, again, have ethically sourced licensed content and data to train these models. So having this one really large company might better position you for that. Now, again, the issue, of course, is antitrust concern, right? That these are the two big players. Does this create a monopoly? And the answer is yes, but who cares? That's kind of my answer. And this is an example of what I'll call a neutered monopoly. This is a term, you've heard it here first on Cinema Q. So, essentially, what I define as a neutered monopoly. It's a monopoly that has monopolistic control over a dying industry, right? So take, for example, I did a video on this channel about a potential merger that ended up, I think, kind of falling apart, that there was going to be a merger between DirecTV and Dish, the satellite TV providers. And what I talked about then was that, 20 years ago, this would have absolutely been blocked for antitrust reasons. But by 2024, satellite TV was such a small portion of, you know, the television market that even having a monopoly of that is not going to, you know, give you the benefits of a monopoly. Because, like, theoretically, companies create monopolies, or they tend towards monopoly, because they're able to drive prices up and costs down in ways that unfairly hurt the consumer, right? But in an example of a neutered monopoly, it's more, I heard someone describe it as, this is more of an act of desperation rather than one of monopoly building, right? This is not to artificially drive prices up and drive costs down in a way that's unfair to consumers, right? This is literally just like, if we don't team up, we're gonna die. Like, this will just not exist. This industry just won't exist anymore. So, I mean, I'm against capitalism in general, and you know, all workers of the world unite, all we have to lose are our chains kind of thing. But, you know, just looking at it within the confines of capitalism, I feel like, who gives a shit, right? Like, if you are a smaller stock image company, then you give a shit. But in terms of the entire market of, you know, I heard someone talking about this, how, take like the Kroger, I forget who they were merging with, but Kroger with another supermarket chain, and it got blocked because it would give them an unfair monopoly. But their argument, which I normally don't agree with corporations, but I understood the logic of the argument, is that it's only monopoly if you look at only the small little window of just grocery stores. But the issue is that we would be a monopoly in the market, in the grocery industry, yes, but we're trying to compete with Amazon and Walmart, who are not, you know, conventionally considered part of that group. So it's one of those things where, you know, at what point, like, people go, oh, like, well, you would have too much control over an industry. But industry is a very loose term. Like, what like, at what point does something stop being one industry and now becomes part of, like, a larger genus in some kind of taxonomical structure, right? So in this case, it would be a monopoly of stock images, but it would be a way to compete in the larger industry or market of media, you know, providing media to customers. In that industry, they are not a monopoly. They're struggling and are going to keep struggling. So, you know, I think it's, you know, a neutered monopoly is not as much of a concern as it might seem on its face. It's also just unclear how aggressive Trump's DOJ is going to be with antitrust in general. If the second administration is anything like the first, it's going to be very disorganized. I don't know if they're going to have a lot of bandwidth or ideological impetus to go after something like this. I don't think Trump really cares about antitrust in general, especially something as low stakes as stock images. Okay, so that wraps up the show. Just want to give one quick final plug to Cinnamon Q. So it's not just a YouTube channel. It started as and still is a Substack newsletter where I publish written reviews for new movies coming out. You know, I've been doing this for almost 3 years. I have like over 100 reviews up at this point. It's been a lot of fun. There's a lot of interesting stuff that we're going to be doing this in 2025 to kind of shake things up. So definitely go check that out. You can find the link in the description down below. You can also just go to your browser, type in cinnamonqso.substack.com. Once again, thank you all so much for watching. If you haven't already, please like this video. It really, really helps with engagement, the algorithm, and other people finding this channel. So if you have found this channel, you should subscribe because we're trying to grow this community. And I like number go up. I'm like a caveman. Number go up, make me happy. Until next time, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you all again so much for watching. Until next time, peace out.